Okay, so the last part we have here is for chapter 15 is the evidence for common descent. This is, Darwin had his thing, but this is everything, okay? Because Darwin didn't really, biochemistry was not a real thing, and um, embryological development, they did utilize that. But with biochemistry and embryology development, you could do so much more. Biochemistry, DNA, that opens up, a whole world of evidence, a whole world of going down a different rabbit hole. Um, you know, having trying to understand where, these fossils, where they exist in the grand scheme of things, and how evolution happens. Look at the dodo, for example. Um, there's only, I think, maybe one or two, I think two complete skeletons in the entire world that were ever discovered. I think there's only one. I think there's only one remaining kind of head of a dodo, with its actual skin for the most part intact. So it's the only one that we have in existence, and getting an idea of kind of where that is. Is it an ostrich? Does it fit in there? And you start looking at kind of the frame and the body, and then they're like, I believe they thought it was a pigeon, and somewhere in the middle of the pigeon family. I don't know, bizarre. But then when they started to do the DNA analysis, it fit in with another group of animals that, not necessarily from Africa or not necessarily from Europe, but from a group of animals, pigeon-like creatures. I can't remember the specific name off the top of my head, but they were from India and Asia. So, because they all shared similar DNA markers. So this whole biochemistry and DNA has kind of opened up a lot of, potential research, but also a hell of a lot more questions too when we try to figure out evidence for common descent. It would make a good short answer question, I guess, on an exam. Talking about Darwin, and his evidence, and then the evidence that is utilized now for common descent. Either of those two would make a good short answer question. How many short answer questions are going to be on this exam? Maybe one or two. So, but again, if you can answer it as a short answer question, you can answer it as a multiple choice question as well. And biogeography we already saw with Darwin. I'll just give a few more examples. Comparative anatomy, field studies. We'll show a little lab study that they've created to kind of, go back even further in terms of where the first cells of life came from. So pretty interesting. So let's get into this stuff here. Fossil evidence, what is a fossil? I think you guys know. But they use this fossil evidence to find a succession of life forms. And when we find a fossil, then we can do, I believe, what's on the next slide, and that's compare the anatomy. You can look at bones of fossils that are found of different humanoid-like creatures, and you can get a sense of if they're a male or female. You can get a sense of how harsh their life was by looking at, how many breaks on their bones that there were. You can tell where bones have healed after a break. Just the sheer size of a bone that's found, or fossils that are found, give you a sense of the size of muscles that can now be there, which gives you kind of an idea of potentially how these different creatures moved, whether it be humanoid or various other different animal found. So some of the earliest human fossils have been found in Africa, and there was there's an interesting, and I'll have to find it. There's so much on like Netflix and Amazon Prime, you can get lost when it comes to some of these documentaries. But there is this one documentary, and I believe it's on Netflix, where they recently discovered a new human, hominid type fossil where it fits in the whole grand scheme of human evolution. There's some still kind of figuring out, there's some debate in that because there's so many gaps in the fossil record when it comes to man, and being able to, and sometimes, you may find a treasure trove of fossils like they did in Africa maybe 10 years ago. And in this documentary, they have to go, they have to go down in this little cave, and you find this huge treasure trove of all these human fossils, and it ended up being a new kind of human species of humanoid that they found in there. But like they follow these people down to this cave, and like the cave is like that wide in spots. And I'm, being facetious, but it was really thin. And like just to sit there and watch these people descend down in this cave, oh my God, my heart is like racing. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that at all. But finding sometimes these transitions between, one human genus and another human genus, it's hard because, and they discuss that in that documentary. You may have Australopithecus this, and then there's there's another genus of the hominid family, and it may have very similar, but there's like one or two differences, and could they interlope together and have offspring? Don't know. I mean, maybe they did, but some of the features are so similar that we may not be able to actually see a true transition from one genus to the next genus. And I think I have maybe a website here at the end that you can go and kind of look around, and it's pretty fascinating. And if it's not, I'll try to pull it up here before you guys all run off. But finding all these fossil evidence, that is kind of where it all begins. Okay, because we can think and we can conjure up stuff, but unless you have some concrete evidence, it's kind of hard to do science without concrete evidence, right? And here, Archaeopteryx, bird-like in nature. I mean, various different evolution of various different fish. The greatest example is looking at the evolution of whales here. And you can see they're using anatomy, okay? These are all similar bones, okay? And you could see kind of how that evolution kind of went there from going from this kind of creature that could get on potentially ground, maybe move around a little bit, to getting a more streamlined. I mean, this is 50 million years, 40 million years. So, I mean, this is something that takes time, and it's hard for us to imagine millions of years when we only live 100. But over a millennia, you can kind of see, you can get these transitions happening, and you see it in a snake as well. Snakes, whales, they both have hip bones, but as you can see with the whale, they obviously don't have lower legs at all, but they still have that structure, which leads us into this. Now that we have a fossil, we can compare anatomy. We can compare anatomy, and that means anatomy means structures. Okay, anatomy means structures. We can see if we have homologous structures. Okay, homologous means similar. Okay, they may not be functional. Okay, they may be functional, they may not be functional. Okay, but they are similar, and when they're similar like that, that suggests some common ancestry. All vertebrate forelimbs contain the same set of bones. Okay, radius and an ulna, some carpals, some metacarpals, and some phalanges. Okay, but function is a little bit different. In us, it's different from a horse. Okay, a whale, a cat, all different. Similar, but a little different in their functions. Analogous means they serve the same function. Not constructed similarly, so they do not share a common ancestor. Okay. Birds, insect wings, okay, very similar. Serve the same function. Sorry, I was looking at the next slide. But they're not constructed similarly, okay, even though they're both used for flight. Vestigial is a fully developed set of structures, like the hips in a whale, but they have no function, okay? And that goes back to this picture that looking at the whale's evolution, okay? Very similar. And you can kind of see, and then over the course of 60 million years, rudimentary structures, vestigial, okay? Snakes have hip bones, like I said. We have a tailbone, okay? We have a tailbone, coccyx, okay? Sacrum. Collectively, that's what people generally refer to as a tailbone. Sacrum gets its name because the ancient Greeks thought it was a sacred bone. I don't know why. Just random stuff that pops in my head. Okay. Third, embryological development, looking at embryos. And here's a great picture here, kind of looking at a chicken and a pig. You would all suggest that these are very different type of creatures, but they share commonalities there. You can see over here from the picture in the textbook, fish, salamanders, tortoise, chicken, human, very similar in embryological development. But then obviously changes start to happen as you continue on. But they all start out very similar. Okay, there's that post-anal tail. Pharyngeal pouches. Okay, these little little pouches right there. You can see them right there. You can see them right there. In humans, those pharyngeal pouches become inner ear bones. Okay, some of the pharyngeal structures through here. And other animals, they'll become various other things. And fish, they help to develop some of their ways to sense sound waves. For other ones, they give rise to some other different digestive structures. So it just varies quite a bit in this thing. But actually, Darwin did use embryological development. There were always slides prepared looking at the different stages in utero of development of many different creatures. And so this is something that Darwin did utilize. We've taken it to the next degree because we can now do biochemistry work with it. We can do DNA work with it. And we can see what genes are turning on and off to give rise to certain structures during embryological development. Various different hormones that get secreted or enzymes that get secreted during different times of in utero development. And so we can get a better understanding of how these structures are starting to take shape, or we can affect it and have it not form properly. So again, it's a better, just an understanding of DNA, the genes, the switches that turn certain things on and off, because there's a switch that happens at some point during development and we start to form arm buds and leg buds. And for a fish, that switch is never turned on and they don't develop arms and legs, okay? Which would be really weird if they did, right? So we could do a lot more with embryological development with biochemistry and DNA work now, obviously, compared to Darwin in his time. 1, 2, 3, 4 here is biochemistry. And of all of these are the things that, this is the thing that obviously Darwin did not have. And not having biochemistry, not understanding the DNA aspect of all this stuff, it's amazing that Darwin was as right as he was with some of his concepts when it came to common descent, how things evolve. It's fascinating, really. It's a shot in the dark that he got right. Proteins, fat, carbs, DNA. You can see the DNA of our closely related species here between chimps and us. I mean, it's about 99% the same. Again, that suggests common ancestry. Okay. You can see a lot of mammals such as mice, 95% the same as us. That's why we do a ton of research on mice and rats. We can breed them and they're very close. Now, is it an exact match? Is it 100%? No. Does 95 sound like a really fantastically close 200%? Yeah. So wouldn't it make sense that lab studies done with mice and rats would translate pretty damn similarly to humans? You would think so, but a lot of things that work in mice or rats in the lab don't work on humans at all because of a whole host of different issues. Okay. You can really regiment a mouse's diet, exercise, when they're asleep, when they're awake. When it comes to humans, when it comes to us, it's very difficult to regiment everything that we ingest and how that interacts and plays with different medication. There's a number of foods that inactivate certain medications. And if you take certain medications, you're not supposed to take certain you're not supposed to consume certain types of foods. So it happens pretty easily. And just that 5% difference is huge in terms of getting something to happen in a lab and getting it to happen in the real world. It's very time consuming and it's very difficult, which is why vaccines generally take a long time to develop, several years to develop. To fast track a vaccine to work like they're trying to do with COVID is very difficult. And everyone now who's non-science is starting to see how difficult that is in real time to get something to produce. I think you hear more about the development of this than any other vaccine I've ever heard of in my life. So, and you're seeing just all the trip ups. And even though it may be potentially 95% effective, what does that mean? Will it be the same for everybody? What if you're overweight? What if you're a normal weight? What if you have a certain genetic condition? What if you have diabetes, type 1? What if you have cystic fibrosis? How will that affect? So there's a whole number of things that we don't know, even though it's 95% effective. When we look at DNA, when it's really similar, guys, and this is what they utilize in a lot of tree of life type of studies. Okay. You can see between us and the primates, very similar. And as you get further and further and further to the most basic type of organism there, you can see how different we are from a DNA profile. We have something in common with yeast. Not a whole hell of a lot, though. Biogeography. Darwin. Still evidence for common descent. Okay. You can see rocks. You can see mineral profiles that are very similar, suggesting biogeography, suggesting that Land masses were in different regions of the globe during different points of Earth's development. As those continents move, they create isolation. They create safe harbor by just the creation of, let's say the landmass moves like a foot. Well, now all of a sudden you introduce a body of water now. And just that foot difference, increasing that a body of water through a region, changes an entire habitat. Changing an entire habitat can change the number of animals that now come into that, can scare off some animals. If, again, over millions of years, that gap gets wider and wider and wider, now we create isolation. And what is that going to allow us to do? It's going to allow that DNA in that little region to be isolated. And if we isolate that DNA for another few million years, now it becomes its own little creature. And let's say there's another group of similar animals that were over here on the other side of that body of water. They have a different environment now. Maybe they don't evolve into something else. And you see that here in Australia. You see it in Madagascar, between Madagascar and Africa. You see it with Australia and Antarctica and South America. There are a number of other plants and animals that have been found on those continents, especially the marsupials. Some other, these marsupials are only found in Australia, and some in South America, some fossils in South America in that regard. And the opossum is the only marsupial here in the Americas. Interesting and fascinating. But because all of those are found in one specific environment, we can start to suggest, as you start to look at DNA, now you can start looking at the DNA profiles of the various different marsupials found on different continents. And you can see there's a lot of commonality between them, and you can suggest some common ancestry there. But it's that isolation that allows that wombat, that allows koalas, that allows the Tasmanian wolf to exist. Madagascar, if you ever get a chance to go to the zoo up in Nebraska, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I'm having a brain fart. Someone's going to chime in here and help me out. Who's going to chime in and help me out? Yes, Omaha. Thank you. Who could forget the great city of Omaha? Okay. The Omaha Zoo, they have a huge kind of Madagascar exhibit there. And just the sheer number of animals that only exist in Madagascar because the environment could support it. It is fascinating. And just a change in environment, just by getting away from Africa and isolating itself, these are creatures that are only found on this island. Okay. This landmass broke off and created enough distance to where these things couldn't get to the mainland, and anything on the mainland couldn't get over there. No predators for these creatures on Madagascar. So they were able to flourish. And it has some of the most diverse land per unit on the globe there in Madagascar. It's insane. It's pretty crazy. Let me change this real quick. Oops. Maybe. Where is my, okay. What is going on? There we go. Okay. Now I know you guys can't see this, but give me a second. Oh, dude. Okay. All right, let me find, hold on. Let me find this real quick. All right, the trick in always looking this up is to find one. All right, give me a second here. No, thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Michael Johnson.
Skip.
Okay, friends, in this video, I'm going to talk about the origin of life.
Okay, I can't. There are a number of experiments that have been around since the 50s. And this Miller-Urey experiment, and I will let you guys go search it on YouTube. I can't find a short one very quickly, and I don't want to sit here and have you stare at me while I'm like looking at the thing at the screen trying to find a short video to explain the Miller-Urey experiment. But there have been a number of studies that have recreated this Miller-Urey experiment that occurred in 1953. This is what they did to kind of demonstrate that evolution can happen, because always the question is, where do we get these complex building blocks, these amino acids and whatnot? And this Miller-Urey experiment introduced or kind of showed how we can get amino acids and proteins and sugars and whatnot from rudimentary Earth. Okay. So they tried to reproduce the Earth's early atmosphere within this jar. Okay. Nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water, hydrogen, methane, ammonia were in there as well. Okay. So in the experiment, into the jar, all of that went. Okay. It was heated. There were a number of always recreating lightning. So lightning strikes, electrical sparks for energy. And when we add energy to something, all of these different things, water, ammonia, methane, hydrogen gases, it would cause these things to start mixing around together. Within a few days, all that muck started to turn brown. So we've gotten all these individual things are all now mixing together and interacting with one another. And that's what those electrical sparks were ultimately doing, causing all of these things to mix. And then after a few days, they did a chemical analysis of that, now not clear water, but that murky water. And they showed the development of some basic amino acids. Then they added some gas and some ultraviolet light from the sun, right? And they were able to get more amino acids. And then they were able to get sugar starting to develop from this. And these are some of those basic building blocks for life, right? Some of your macronutrients, those macromolecules, those biomolecules that we talked about way back at the beginning. And they were able to let this go and go and go, and you got more complex and more complex chemical structures. Now, would that have eventually all of a sudden something started growing legs and walking around? I mean, nothing like that happened. But could that potentially have happened? I don't know. Maybe, yes. Okay. There are so many things that go into the explosion of life that happened on this planet, right? UV, lightning strikes, interaction, high methane. There are a number of various different documentaries that you can see on Netflix or Amazon Prime looking at how the earth changed. And it takes millions of years for this. And we'll look at macroevolution here next week, and we'll see what some of those patterns are for macroevolutionary change to occur. When it comes to